Hey, welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on 93 WIBC out of Indianapolis, and from there to our syndicated partners across the country. It's good to be with you this evening because there is a lot of crazy, insane, and just good old-fashioned wild news to dig into here on the live streams, of course, also as well over on the podcast services, wherever it is that, you choose to get your particular podcasts. So, moving right along this evening from the top, the left is in a state of absolute panic. The right is kind of flirting just a little bit with, just a little bit of panic and things of that nature. And everyone everywhere is just making all of the promises that they can. And I mean, gee whiz, gee willikers, it really is a situation in which everyone is just doing their hot dog darndest to make sure that this election is one to remember. So Donald Trump on the right is promising everything from cutting taxes to cutting insurance rates. President doing a really good impersonation of the gecko from Geico, saying he's going to cut everybody's auto insurance in half, and also he's going to cut taxes on Social Security, and he's going to cut taxes on tips, and he's going to cut taxes on all of these other employment micro-transactional taxes that we all pay. And he's going to take a chunk out of this, and it's going to be fantastic. And then you've got Kamala Harris, and she's going to make sure that everybody's got a house and a car in every garage and a chicken in every pot. Sorry, I was channeling my former inner Louisiana governor, good old Huey Long. But she's also promising everything but the kitchen sink, and if it's made with environmentally responsible materials, she'll even promise the kitchen sink to you as well. And these promises all roll in on the back of a serious amount of panic in both parties. And it's kind of weird to see, because this is usually the time of a presidential election cycle in which one candidate's kind of starting to pull away and the other one can only really sit there and watch. That's really not what's happening. And the main reason that's not happening, just so we can get this out of the way, is because everyone pretty much already knows how they feel about Donald Trump. And that's a huge deciding factor in this election, because Kamala Harris, although somewhat of a sort of unknown, can really only go down from where she is. She's kind of a stereotypical progressive as far as Democrats are concerned, and she's also not targeting a lot of demographics that are traditionally left-wing voters. We're going to get into that in just a minute. The biggest reason for the left absolutely panicking is a poll that came out today from the Teamsters. So, major unions in the country. You've got the teachers unions, which is the NEA, the National Education Association, and the American Federation of Teachers. Right behind them, you have the United Auto Workers. And then right after that are the Teamsters. Those are the three biggest groups. Really, technically, I guess you could say two groups. You have the education unions, and then you are immediately followed by the trade and industry unions. Teamsters, over the last 30 years, has always endorsed a presidential candidate. And all but once endorsed the Democrat candidate. 90s Labor Democrats were kind of the bread and butter for the Teamsters for a long time. And by the way, back when the Teamsters did a presidential straw poll, when Biden was still in the race, it was Biden at 44.3%, followed by Trump at 36.3%, which is really high for a Republican in a union poll, and then RFK at 5.6%, and then Cornel West, the weird yelling communist, at 1.7. Now, according to an electronic member poll from Teamsters, Harris is at 34%. Other candidates, which they haven't really released what the other candidates mean, so we can kind of assume that RFK is still included in that, along with West and then maybe even Jill Stein. Trump is at 59.6% in that poll. So Harris at 34%, Trump basically at 60%. That's insane. And the Teamsters leadership freaked out. We can't be the Teamsters and actually endorse Donald Trump. Oh my God, we can't do that. And so they actually came out today and said, we're not endorsing anybody. The polls just happen to show our membership supports a Republican nominee more than any union has ever supported a Republican nominee in the polls. It is unreal. And then the second reason that the left is panicking, we'll get to in just a second. But there's time for a little bit of right-wing panic as well. See, the 2024 Pennsylvania Real Clear Politics polling average has got Harris kind of sort of sweeping ahead of Trump in Pennsylvania. There was a Quinnipiac poll that had Kamala up 51 to Donald Trump's 46. And the left immediately ran out and they were cheering in the streets. They're like, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to cool your jets just a little bit, though. Because while Pennsylvania is still the state that every individual in this election desperately needs to swing not just the presidency, but also the House and a sure other number of kind of electoral shifts in the country culture-wise, the Quinnipiac poll has a different date set than some of the other polls. And this matters very particularly, and I'm going to explain. So, Quinnipiac, the poll was taken from September 12th to September 16th, 2 days ago. Now, the bulk of the likely voters in the poll voted in the early part of that polling window, which means that it was right after the debate. That's the Kamala Harris bump. Not a large bump, but a bump all the same. However, when you look at polls that are from September 14th and September 15th, right after Donald Trump's second survived assassination attempt, good Lord, what a crazy time we're living in, that poll taken on the 14th and the 15th has Trump up to 50 to Kamala's 48. So what does that mean? It means that they're basically tied in Pennsylvania. And if the Teamsters now are not able to endorse a candidate, that very severely hurts Kamala Harris. And that leaves basically one demographic that Kamala can pitch to. She's already spent all of her time like preaching to suburban women and trying to rally up the abortion race. She's trying this down in Georgia because it almost kind of sort of vaguely didn't do terribly with the Senator Raphael Warnock election. But now she's trying her darndest to go after the Hispanic vote. Now, the Hispanic vote has been shifting away to Republicans over the last decade for two reasons. Number one, because Hispanic individuals actually do not like en masse. And when I say Hispanic individuals, I mean people from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, all the way down to some of the South American countries like Venezuela, Colombia, people who were in traditional Hispaniola. That individuals from those countries to the United States who emigrated here legally, aka who are registered voters, most of them, they have kind of a different opinion on Democratic policy, which has moved more and more open borders over the last couple of years. Here was a Hispanic voter saying this right after the Harris-Trump debate.
We still have to have a controlled border, a secure border, because, yeah, we've had a lot of people going through the border illegally. My family went through a long process to get here legally, so I feel that it's unfair for hundreds of thousands to get here without problems, and then for the federal government to help them out. We've also lost Americans because so many illegals were letting in, like the young boy from Ohio who had killed by illegal immigrants.
Now, that makes a very significant impact as well for the voting demographic, also the economy, a lot of Hispanic individuals here in this country. And the reason I say Hispanic individuals instead of Hispanic Americans is if you're a legal immigrant into this country, you're an American, period. You're not an Indian American or an Irish American or a German American or a Hispanic American. You're an American. You may have a heritage. You may hail from some place down the ancestral line, but once you're a citizen, legally, you are an American. Those of Hispanic descent are more likely, especially first and second generation immigrants, are far more likely to engage in the trades and in small businesses. Two things that the Biden administration has absolutely screwed over. And Kamala Harris seems to be doing her absolute darndest to make sure is even worse. So how is Kamala fighting this? Well, for a long time, she did what a lot of race hustlers in the United States do, and that's ignore the Hispanic population, which I saw a lot during my time when I was working for Governor Walker's office in Wisconsin. I saw it extensively when I worked for Indianapolis Public Schools. The Hispanic groups of this country are so often ignored, it's really disgusting. By a lot of these individuals who say that race is so important to them and the stratification of who's benefited more or less than who. Now that it looks pretty likely that for the first time we could see, according to the data, that Trump has a solid 42% of Hispanic voters per a New York Times poll, 51% only for Kamala Harris. That would be with likely Hispanic voters. That's the lowest number a Democrat has ever had in modern polling. Now, how is Kamala going to try to get him back? Well, she's going to try the fear-mongering mass deportation tactic. Here's Kamala desperately trying this move today. Ain't going to work.
And now they have pledged to carry out the largest deportation, a mass deportation in American history. Imagine what that would look like and what that would be.
Yeah, it would be everyone who doesn't have citizenship in the country or legal reason to be here, as in a visa, or they migrated through a port of entry. They would be told to leave because they're not supposed to be here. They're taking federal resources. No. And then Kamala really jumps the shark. So at one point over the last, actually not at one point, over several points in the last couple of months, Kamala's pulled out all of these different accents that she's used. Today, when responding to a member in the crowd, she whips out what appears to be some kind of Hispanic accent, and oh boy.
I love you back.
So the first time I heard that, I was like, oh my. Oh my. So I went back and actually found like some other clips of Kamala basically using the language. She's never gone, I loved you back. Putting the J in front of you is like diabolically stereotypical. Holy crap. So best of luck to Kamala. Well, up next, we're going to talk about something else that the Harris-Walz ticket is struggling on, and that is understanding the Constitution. We're going to be talking with Lathan Watts over from the Alliance Defending Freedom here in a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, first on 93 WIBC.
Attention. You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Hey, welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated. Joining us is the one, the only Lathan Watts, and we're going to get into some of the details on a brand new op-ed of his over at the Federalist that you absolutely need to read. But first of all, a very happy belated Constitution Day to you, sir.
Yes, and to you too. Thanks for having me.
So, obviously, the same thing that outraged me, outraged a lot of Americans, although I shouldn't say surprised, because, the New York Times is worth about as much as its weight in toilet paper, if that. The New York Times recently published an article called "America's Constitution is Sacred. Is it also dangerous?" Ooh. And you very articulately pointed out in this article over at the Federalist that that's one of the silliest, stupidest things that has perhaps been published in some time. So break it down for us before we get any further into the conversation.
Certainly. So to save people the time of reading the article, as you mentioned, because that would be about 15 to 20 minutes of your life you'll never get back, I put in my response that, is the Constitution dangerous? A simple no would suffice. But the fact that a publication as widely read as the New York Times would even ask the question is an indication of a much bigger problem. And that is that the Constitution is not widely understood, that there is a sort of national amnesia about the principles that are contained in the Constitution and the success of the Constitution for a couple of centuries now. And Constitution Day being, the day that seemed like the best day to run this piece at the Federalist, really should be a day that is observed, frankly. And I put in the opening of the piece that it will likely go, unnoticed because no one gets a day off from work. There aren't any furniture sales, and no one's getting famous, making a viral TikTok about the separation of powers or federalism. But the Constitution is a covenant between the governing and the governed. And how can a covenant be upheld if neither side understands it or respects it? And so if there is a danger associated with the Constitution, it is not the document, it is the popular ignorance of it, and how that leads to then electing government officials with no respect or adherence to it.
And that's really the key issue, that you have a lot of individuals who, anytime you have some kind of a qualm over a law, over some type of a tragedy that occurs, people immediately run to kind of the most surface level policy that we can pass that unilaterally either bans something or provides something universally with infinite funding. And those are considered kind of the two levers to pull. And it's such a disgrace with how the founding fathers set up the Constitution, because you don't have to run to those two extremely populists or extremely popular, meaning mob rule style levers to pull, which end up destroying every single republic that, runs back and forth between banning something and then universally providing something. I mean, you can point all the way to any number of French republics, to the Weimar Republic, to those that collapsed in South America, to, of course, Eurasia. When we look at the situation we're at now, you point out that it's not only people who are kind of screaming out against the void that they are entitled to something or that something needs to be banned. They're entitled to the right from something, as we hear a lot of the anti-gun activists say. Why do you think that we've made it so far as a country into the stage of electing leaders that don't understand the Constitution either, without suffering some of the long-term effects of kind of irreversible degradation of the republic?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. I think, honestly, my gut reaction is because of the brilliance of the Constitution itself, the principles that are contained in there of limited government, separation of powers, a keen awareness of the fallen nature of man, that when people are in power, they are inclined to protect that power. I think those principles and the institutions that are contained in the Constitution are still sound. And part of the humility and the brilliance of the founders was they wrote into the Constitution a way to remedy any shortcomings in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. So I think there is still a public understanding of a lot of the concepts but we don't see it play out. It's not talked about really in campaigns. It's hard to put together a 30-second soundbite on the principle of limited government and the brilliance of separation of powers and the Article 3 judiciary and the fact that our administrative state exists because the legislative branch has basically abdicated its lawmaking authority to the executive branch. That's tough to fit into a TikTok video. That's tough to fit into a 5-minute Fox News interview or a campaign commercial. So even though I don't think we hear in our political rhetoric sort of a deep discussion of those things, I do think there is still a basic knowledge of it, which gives me hope. Mm-hmm. And I think that particularly I'm a parent, particularly as parents take a responsibility to make sure that your children understand these things, because they are not likely to be taught them with any depth in government-run schools, that there is hope for the future. Anytime that liberty is waxed and waned, it's never gone completely. There's always the opportunity to work back towards that ideal and the principles set up in the Constitution.
Well, there's a lot of threads to pull on from there, including where I was kind of planning on going, which was talking about, of course, Congress kind of abdicating a lot of its leadership towards the regulatory state and federal agencies. There are a lot of campaigns these days that, let's see if I can frame this correctly. It seems like they are advocating in their campaigns, on both the left and, to a degree, the right, on moving away from the constitutional framework by tweaking things to suit kind of short-term temporary political needs, like packing and expanding the Supreme Court, or changing to a popular vote instead of an electoral college, or changing to a nuclear option in the Senate, or changing, you know what I'm saying, these kinds of small increments that have taken a long time to pull apart what the founders intended. But you and I agree on that. Most of my listeners understand that. We know that. So let's move in a slightly different thread that you put out there. I can't help pulling. You have kids?
Yes, sir. 2 daughters.
Awesome. So I have 2 kids as well. There were a lot of things that I didn't know about kids that I really didn't bother to learn until I had children, because I didn't really need to know them. And once I started learning about kids, I really got into learning all kinds of things about babies and toddlers that I had no idea even existed as things that we had looked into. And I think that if I can tie this thread to another loose thread, as individuals get older in this country, they often get more conservative. Do you think that one of the reasons people become more conservative as they become older is that they start to encounter things that I've never really needed to know about the Constitution until this point? Now you have a lot of adults that I have seen, like I know Hillsdale offers an adult college course on the Constitution. There are a lot of kind of newer trends of adults going and learning U.S. civics they didn't get in schools. Do you think I'm kind of rabbit hunting and trying to make something out of nothing, or do you think there might be a connection there?
No, I think there could be a connection there. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, if you're not a liberal when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative when you're old, you don't have a brain.
You don't have a brain. I love that.
Yeah. I think some of it is the point that you raised, that the older you get and the more you encounter or become more aware of your interaction.
Kind of forced to reckon with government.
Exactly. I mean, for me, it was a teenager, the first paycheck I ever brought home, and having my dad.
Why is FICA getting so much of my money?
Who is this FICA guy? Why is he taking my, and my dad going through it with me, like, this is federal income tax, this is Social Security. And by the way, that's probably going to be bankrupt by the time you're old enough to get it. So you should probably plan for your own retirement. The older you are, the more maybe you become aware of it. Also, I think with age, you have more experience to see the results and the outcome of some really well-intentioned policy that was enacted.
That's a really good
point. And then you have to live with it.
To catch the rest of my interview with Lathan Watts, you're going to need to head over to the Daily Signal's YouTube or over to the podcast, where we'll have the full interview up and ready to go. We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, and first out of 93 WIBC.
It seems...
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated. Man, after the crazy story that I had an opportunity to share with you yesterday, I was not particularly expecting to get such an, let's say, a very unique update that we had today. So, as a quick recap, and we'll even give maybe a little bit of a broader context here. So, back in February, Israel fired an airstrike into southern Lebanon, and actually ended up taking out a Hezbollah leader, and this made a lot of individuals in Hezbollah very mad, because this particular individual, the Hezbollah leader, was one of the people who had given the Hamas terror organization a lot of advice and things on how to carry out the October 7th massacre. So that basically put a very interesting notice out to those that are in the Hezbollah terrorist Iranian proxy group, which is that we can reach you wherever it is that you are. We have no problem. So fast forward to September 17th, yesterday. After realizing that maybe carrying around cell phones, the GPS trackers in them, probably wasn't a super brilliant idea, the Hezbollah terrorist organization instead basically ordered all of their members of the terrorist cell to get pagers instead. And so they bought wholesale big gold pallets of pagers. And then yesterday, the Israeli Defense Force and Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, basically touched off a layer of explosive that they had added to the batteries of these pagers, and basically won the world record for the most vasectomies completed at one time. And it was really quite incredible. In fact, as I made the point later on a show this morning, honest to God, there are probably fewer Sunni Muslim, fewer Christians, and fewer Jews and agnostics being raped in southern Lebanon than at any point in the last 40 years of southern Lebanon, which is a very good. I'm sorry, looking looking at some of the preening and the posturing, we'll get to that in just a second, online from individuals who are saying this is so extra super duper terrible. Quick fun fact here. In fact, two fun facts. First of all, according to a United Nations order in 2006, that, believe it or not, the leaders at the time of Hezbollah actually kind of signed on to, Hezbollah is not allowed to be in southern Lebanon at all. They're supposed to stay away from that particular region. This isn't like some kind of like cultural ethnic group. That Hezbollah is an Iranian-backed militia, has been for a very long time. And they were told by the UN to get out of there. In fact, the UN was actually supposed to make sure they were kept out of there, but the UN is about as useful as a fork when eating soup. So they're not supposed to be there. Number two, Hezbollah murdered 241 Americans, 241 American citizens at the Beirut airport in 1983. So if you think I'm going to be shedding any tears because a bunch of Hezbollah terrorists yesterday lost their testicles, I'm sorry, I'm just not feeling that. And then things got even better today. So not only did the pagers blow up, but then today, the Mossad touched off the explosives that were placed on batteries in a new order of like walkie-talkies and shortwave radio transceivers, like handheld radios. And those caused another number of Hezbollah injuries. Now, here's the funny thing. Over 2,700 Hamas terrorists were injured in the attack, from what we can gather in intelligence yesterday. We're not sure on the number today. 8 people have died. Those 8 people, all Hezbollah identified terrorists. No civilian casualties at this present time. Now, here's a little bit of extra fun fact here for you. As of now, Israel has actually begun striking the southern Lebanon towns of Mais al-Jabal, Belida, Araturun, Khiham, Shahin, and Teva. So Israel is actually now basically having put up with the Hezbollah terrorist organization for long enough, who have launched, by the way, I should point out in the last couple of weeks, hundreds and hundreds of rockets indiscriminately fired towards civilian areas in Israel. So much so that Israel's actually had to evacuate all of northern Israel. Israel's finally saying, you know what, our people have a right to live anywhere in this country that they want. They want to live in the north, they can, so you're done. and they've actually started pushing forward and launching airstrikes. This might be the beginning of a very serious military operation. Obviously, if we have any breaking news, we'll keep you abreast. This brings us to the aluminum foil. So, what was actually carried out was a series of electronic devices like pagers and walkie-talkies and things like that were intercepted by Mossad, and they placed a small amount of basically a form of plastic explosive that can be thermally activated inside the battery casing and then shipped them the rest of the way to Hezbollah. Now, that did not stop the conspiracy theorists. I don't mean conspiracy theorists as mean like you're right about COVID. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people who suggest really wired ultranational crazy things like the Freemasons are secretly running the world. Things that there's not like any evidence for at all except a Facebook post you saw back in 2009. And this is the part we need to discuss. So, Edward Snowden, who is famous for leaking a bunch of United States intelligence information, fluffing it with fake information himself at the behest of the Russian government. He is a paid Russian agent. If you don't like that, you may like some of the stuff he stands for. He is in fact paid by the government of Russia. Edward Snowden absolutely despises the United States. He despises Christians. He despises the West. Sorry. He decided to get on social media yesterday and say some extra stupid things. This is where the aluminum foil comes out. We're talking like multiple layers of aluminum foil. So he said, as information comes out about the exploding beepers in Lebanon, it seems now more likely that not to be implanted explosives, not a hat. Why? Too many consistent, very serious injuries. If they were overheated batteries exploding, you would expect many more fires and misfires. So he does bring up an interesting point there, which is that a lot of people immediately jumped on the super conspiracy wagon that all phones could be exploded by the CIA or Mossad in like 3 seconds. No, that's not how that works. I'm sorry to inform you guys, that's just not how tech works. But then Snowden completely jumped the shark. He says, what Israel has done is, via any method, reckless. They blew up countless numbers of people who were driving, shopping, etc., indistinguishable from terrorism. No, I'm sorry. Attacking a militia or military group is not attacking civilians. It's just not. According to the operation statistics that we have so far, fewer civilians were injured in this attack than any modern urban military operation in history. Sorry, there's going to be collateral damage in any kind of a military action. That is one of the horrors of war. That's why war is in fact a horror. But it's not terrorism. Just because it was carried out neatly, and I'm again considering how many Americans, how many Christians Hezbollah has slaughtered in the last 40 years, I don't feel. I'm sorry, I don't feel bad for Hezbollah. And he goes on and he talks about how evil Israel is for basically carrying out this entire nonsensical thing. And there's this idea that CIA and Mossad are all working together to blow up the phones around the world. No, that is not the way that it is. And there are a lot of kind of the more libertarian individuals who are saying this is very, very dangerous. And I'm going to ask you why. Why is this incredibly dangerous? Is this dangerous because they waited to strike and then struck? Because that's how militaries operate. The old headlong throw the entire military into an area strategy is not always the best one. Wars are, in fact, a horrible part of this world. It is not a good thing, but at times, geopolitical tensions do necessitate military intervention. And immediately getting out the pearls and doing all of the clutching and suggesting that basically everyone should allow themselves to be shot or have rockets thrown at them. By the way, Edward Snowden has never once cared about the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rockets thrown into Israel by Hezbollah. It is exceptionally gross to basically consider this some type of super, oligarchic conspiracy theory. When, by the way, at the present time, there are actual serious election interferences that are occurring. For example, that Iranian hackers sent stolen Trump campaign information to Biden associates, according to the FBI. So in June and July, Iran hacked the Trump campaign and sent a bunch of those stolen documents to the Harris-Walz campaign. Now, they've come out and said they hate Iranian election interference or election interference from anybody, but they didn't say anything about this back in June or July. They didn't actually warn the Trump campaign. In fact, Trump has survived 2 assassination attempts since they received the information, according to the FBI. So I'm sorry, I just don't want to hear it. There are too many real stories at the present time that need accountability for without adding made-up boogeymen onto the pile. And speaking of made-up boogeymen, we're going to talk about the one over at Disney. Be back in just a second. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
So, boy, I was expecting the worst when I saw a little bit about Disney's Inside Out 2. So, as a little bit of a refresher, Inside Out, the movie about this girl Riley who moved to San Francisco, poor thing. And she has all these emotions going on inside her head, each represented by a different character. and it's a pretty good movie. It kind of was a return to classic Pixar, although kind of a little heavy-handed in some areas. Pretty good stuff. And there was a sequel that was announced, and things got really weird and gross very quickly. So I think we talked about this on the show back at the time, at least Stephen Kent and I did on What You Watchin'. People started sexualizing the children in the commercial very quickly, saying that they thought Riley, the main character, she might be a lesbian, or she might be non-binary because look at her shirt, and all this other really weird, creepy stuff. And then the movie ended up coming out, and the movie was pretty good. I was kind of bored while I was watching it, but it wasn't terrible. As sequels go, at least it's not like the live-action Lion King, which, funnily enough, is actually what Inside Out 2 beat to become the quote-unquote biggest animated movie of all time, just meaning that it has the most views in the opening portion of its release. Now the controversy. So, according to IGN, several Pixar employees have basically come forward saying that two things. Number one, the conditions at Disney were apparently really rough. Oh, just really terrible. Now, not actually as rough as, the sweatshop labor that Disney uses to make all the plastic toys, but no, not that particularly. They didn't qualify for their bonuses while working on the film. They were told not to come to the office to pick up their belongings. Basically, there was a lot of layoffs, and the suspicion for the reason of these layoffs is because a lot of the writers wanted to put a bunch of, here's the shocker, LGBTQ themes into the production. Ah, yes, because a movie targeted at elementary school really needs a lot of conversations about who you want to have sex with and weird, nonsensical garbage to confuse children. That's what parents want their kids to be watching. Well, after the Buzz Lightyear movie, in which Disney, again, has been dabbling in this kind of nonsense for a while, they realized they were kind of tired of losing money because people weren't actually taking their kids to see the film because it was about a social advocacy angle and not actually about a good story. And so Disney, apparently, again, according to IGN and several others that have come forward, Disney basically attempted to tone down what they call the film's, quote, queer themes, quote. Now, you'll notice that since they cut them out, the movie's actually done really well. By focusing on, like, an actual good story and not, like, hammering a bunch of gender politics into it, people kind of a fan. And now all of the journalists are kind of clutching their pearls and freaking out because, oh, guys, it's terrible. I can't believe that Disney wouldn't want Inside Out 2 to just be like a big pride festival. I mean, I can think of a reason why, perhaps several hundred millions reasons why, meaning that they kind of want people to go to the theater to see it. And after the reviews came in and said that it was a pretty decent movie, they probably liked getting the money and the revenue from those sales. People like movies because they're good writing. The moral and the lessons from the story come afterward. Now, this is something that we know in a common sense fashion because you like something that is good, and then later on you kind of analyze the lyrics or the writing or the story or the style. Going in politics first was one of Disney's biggest mistakes in the 2010s and the early 2020s, and they have paid for it by the billions. And so if a couple of writers, theater majors from Who Cares University, have to be laid off, well, shucks, I'm sorry to say they just really won't be missed. Big old bag of womps there. So that about does it for tonight's show. We will be back tomorrow to cover just a little bit more on the nonsense train that is the 2024 election. Thank you very much for tuning in. Stay safe. This has been the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.